Hi, everyone. This is Tatiana Gidiez. I'm hosting Thrive and Shine. It's a podcast on amazing people around the world who are living very authentically and leading their lives and their businesses with consciousness and, again, authenticity. So today I have the honor to welcome Marie Wiese, who is a senior... There we go. We have this little applaud thing happening. I love it. Marie, welcome.
Hi, how are you?
Good. I'm awesome. Thank you for joining us. I know we cut you a little bit at the last second with this Zoom issue, but we are now together, and we are. I can't wait to hear more of what you are going to be sharing, as we were just preluding this show by having this awesome conversation before, you and I. So you are a marketing expert. You have your own firm. That is called CoPilot, right?
Marketing CoPilot, yeah.
Marketing CoPilot. So sorry. And you also have a lot of things going on, as many women do. You have also a podcast that feature women in tech. It's called Women Talk Tech. And today we're going to be talking more in depth about the ways that you use your marketing firm and you combine your expertise of marketing and of life to serve your clients in a way that differs from I'm sure everybody else. So thank you for joining.
Yeah, no, it's exciting to be here. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. So as we were starting to see how we would align forces today, we were talking about, of course, women. And this show is not just about women. It really features men and women who want to support each other and who are really committed to applying all that they learn every day to their businesses and to their lives. And so as we were digging a little bit deeper, you and I, we started to shed some light on perfectionism, and we started talking about issues that most women have. I would say I know men do too. The only thing is we're not really experts in the way that men handle certain issues that we encounter in our lives, as far as perfectionism, confidence, worthiness. There's a lot of very particular identified challenges that are, I think, more prevalent in women's lives than they are perhaps in men's lives, right? And so
sorry, somebody just came to the door and I had to do one of those.
That's usually what I do with my dogs.
And I have a new puppy, and so that's made things a little bit more complicated in my house. So
you know what? It's all good, because I usually have my dogs at some point barking because the postman passes by, and it's a typical story with dogs and postmen. I don't know. I thought that was a myth, but it really isn't.
It's not.
They hate my postman.
Yeah.
So yeah, so what has been the experiences in your life that have brought some of these issues and challenges to your attention? How did it come up that you had to spend more time going inside and figuring out what is holding you back?
Yeah, so I want to start in a couple of places, and I want to talk a little bit about being a woman of a certain age and of a certain era, and the perceptions that I had as a young woman growing up about what my life needed to look like and what I needed to be doing for a living and the things that I needed to have in my life. And I think there is, first of all, I want to say, I think there's a certain generation of women, and I think this is important for men to understand as well, who came through what I'm going to sort of call the post-feminism movement of, women. It was sort of this idea women can be in the workplace. women can have a job. And then it was women can have a job and a family. And this idea of having it all and deciding that you were going to have a career, you were going to have a family, you were going to do everything. And then there's this idea of you're going to do everything perfectly. It all has to be exactly right. And so I was very much of that generation of women. I graduated in the mid 80s from university. I went to university. I studied English and communications and wanted to have a really exciting, really important career. And I started off down that path and was working in the corporate world, met my husband, got married, had my first child when I was 27, had my second child when I was 30, had my third child when I was 34. And along the way, put a lot of pressure on myself and put a lot of pressure on the people around me. And that pressure to succeed and be really good at everything that, you know, you've got to look at who some of the role models were during those time periods. Martha Stewart, you know, everything had to look good. Your house had to look great. You had to be really good at design, your interior designing. You had to be really good at cooking. You had to be really good at hosting parties and being a great entertainer. And you had to be working 60 hours a week, and you had to be a really good mom.
And a good spouse, like a really, you know, you had to be a good spouse in order to hold it all together with your husband.
Well, and on that topic, that was always the bottom of the list because you just assumed that was going to be taken care of, right? It was, you know, that to me was always at the bottom of the list. I just assumed that all that stuff would work out. So, you know, I really started to notice this pretty dramatically in my late 30s, which is when I had a bout with a really bad bowel condition myself. And I had to have several rounds of surgery after having just had my third child. And so it really weighed on me, these health issues of trying to feel better, look after my kids, deal with my job. And I was in a very stressful job with this was through a very dramatic period in the .com bubble in the late 80s, early 90s, late 90s, early 2000s of this next inflection of the .com bubble where people were investing in a lot of .coms and then it all fell apart in sort of 2001, 2002. And I'd invested my own personal money into the company and a lot of things had happened. And it was this trifecta of my own health, the company imploding, my financial stake in the company imploding. It's a story that a lot of people during that time in the tech sector tell, right? So I left that experience feeling one of three ways: tired and unwell from a health perspective, exhausted by everything I'd just done over the last 10 years from a business perspective, and thinking to myself, I didn't want to be making money for other people. It was time to make money for myself. And that's in 2003 when I went out as a consultant and decided I was going to figure out how to start my own business because I wanted a different lifestyle. I wanted to be in control of my own finances. And I wanted to be able to be a better parent to my children and to my spouse. And my spouse at the time had decided to stay home with our children and be a stay-at-home dad, which was very different. And we moved to the country so that our kids could grow up in the country out of the city. And we put ourselves through a lot of change at this time, thinking this was going to be the answer. This was going to make me feel like I had a sense of control. It was going to make me feel like this was going to solve a lot of problems. And so proceeded to work really hard to build the business, still had this sense of I had to be doing it a certain way. I had to be making a certain amount of money. I had to be, out there doing a number of different things. And it was just this sense of pressure and putting pressure on myself and feeling like I have to get to the next step. I have to get to the next step. This isn't good enough. I have to work harder to do the next thing. And even with respect to ticking off the boxes as the kids were graduating from high school or milestones in their lives, we have to do this next round of things, this unbelievable amount of pressure that you need to be perfect at all these things, have complete control over all these things. And that this was the way you were going to succeed. This was what the definition of success was. And, what I noticed, and I'm sure a lot of people share this experience, when you have this sense of pressure on you, you notice that you're not living in the moment, meaning that you're not enjoying what's going on around you. You're always waiting to get through the task list or the checklist of now I have to do this. And you don't stop to enjoy. So unfortunately, then the crescendo hit. I kept, on the treadmill, scramble, scramble, scramble. And then my husband got sick. So you remember the thing I put at the very bottom of the checklist of, I don't need to worry about this. Well, suddenly I needed to worry about it. Suddenly I needed to move it to the top of the list, that now it never occurred to me that he might get sick and that I might have to look after him, and that this was going to throw this huge wrench into our life. So that happened for the first time in 2014, and then again last year. And so in 2014, I sort of managed to, scramble and get things organized and, take the time I needed to look after him for 6 months, but thinking I was getting it all back on track. And then when he got sick again in 2018, that's when sort of the real wake-up call transpired for me, which was, no, you don't have this under control. You think you've sorted all these things out. You think you've figured all of this out, and yet you're tired, you're stressed out, you're unhappy, and you're barely managing to keep it together. And through this very, very dramatic, very traumatic time in our family, you're just barely getting out of bed every day. And, this is what I think forced me to start thinking about how I wanted to spend my days, just the average day. How did I want to process the work I was doing? How did I want to spend my time? And how could I achieve this state of enjoying the moment I was in and not being terrified from the moment I just come from, or concerned about the moment I had not yet achieved? And so that's when I realized, I really have to do some work here, and I have to figure out how to pave a way forward that can't be the way I was doing it before, because the way I was doing it before just wasn't working. And it was then that I stumbled upon some of Brené Brown's research, as you and I have talked about, and I started to dig into this idea of what the heck is perfectionism, and have I really been living with this all my life and hadn't noticed? But when she described some of the symptoms of that, I recognized myself in those symptoms and realized, I've been living a bit of this, and I need to find my way out of this. Because if I don't, it's going to manifest itself in ways that aren't going to be good. And sure enough, at the end of last year, I myself got sick, and I realized it was my body telling me, okay, enough's enough. Like, you've got to figure a different way out of this. And I just wanted to say for a second, and I'm just looking, apologize. I'm looking for something here. When you and I talked, I think it's important for listeners, I just would share the definition on Wikipedia of this idea of perfectionism. It's in psychology, it's a personality trait characterized by a person striving for flawlessness and setting high performance standards, accompanied by critical self-evaluations and concerns regarding others' evaluations. And it's best conceptualized as a multidimensional characteristic. And psychologists agree that there are many positive and negative effects of what we call perfectionism. And one of the negative effects is depression. And as I started to sort of study this topic and, look at it closely, this is definitely when I started to realize that there was something going on here. There was something definitely worth taking a deeper look at. And I felt grateful that somebody, I know we hate it when we put, a definition on something or they give it a label, but I actually felt grateful when I read that, because it felt like somebody had articulated what I was feeling.
You put your finger on exactly how you felt, which is it provides relief.
It really did.
And so thank you for such a sincere share of what has transpired for you and how you got to this point where you realized that this way that you were living your life was really, in fact, a perception that you wanted to lead your life. It was a perception of you and a perception you wanted to give of the world of who you are. was it really the true you? Likely not, as you're discovering that today. And you really gave this description in, for me, in the perfect way, simply because it's actually the description of the the client, the woman I work with, as I've also dealt with this challenge myself. This is why I do what I do today, because I've gone through it. And when we were sharing, one of the things that I think is important also for people to know, and women particularly, is that we might have this knowing that we are stricken by perfection, and that we are in fact perfectionists, and that we might know that of ourselves, and we might start the journey of wanting to perhaps do it or live life differently and work differently. However, it's very intrusive in our world, because it's also very, what's the word I'm looking for, it easily can escape us, and that we can, for what happened with me and for me, and still happens, because I think that as humans we continuously have to evolve and work on ourselves, but it takes many different faces. This perfectionism, it takes the face of working too much, and we want to dial that down and work a little bit less in order to, so we might work a bit less, but then it's going to show up again in a different area of our life. It's going to show up in the expectations we have of ourselves, and the way we look, or it's going to show up in the way that we are actually being with our spouse or as a parent. It just shows up everywhere. That's been my experience.
Yeah, it absolutely does. I would agree with that. Yes.
And so it's forever. This is why it's so important to talk about this, because it's a pervasive challenge that most of our generation of women, and I do not know whether the millennials have as much of an issue as we, the boomers, do, in the face of life and work and ambition and all of that. But this is a serious challenge for us. And so it creates this level of shame whenever we do not perform, or we are not the ideal person we want to be. It creates it brings up rather that this huge shame and sense of vulnerability, which Brené Brown, we spoke about, has studied at great length. And for me, she's such a source of information and such a source of inspiration as to how to word and language better than Wikipedia what shame sounds like or feels like. I have a quick definition of shame, because I believe in synchronicity. And as you are coming on my show, I was actually doing a new vision board yesterday for my own life. And there is an amazing quote on shame that I absolutely adore, that comes from Brené Brown. And she says, or she writes rather, shame is the intensely painful feeling or experience of believing that we are flawed and therefore unworthy of love and belonging.
Yeah, that's a very good definition.
Right? And when you think about that, and you actually venture into every part of life that where this feeling might come up, it's literally pretty much every part of life.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah.
So then, as you have started to dig deeper into it, what are the gifts that it has actually given you?
Well, gifts is an interesting word. This has been a lifetime of living my life a certain way, behaving a certain way, believing a certain set of things, and believing things that my inner critic would tell myself. So it's not easily undone. It doesn't just come together overnight. And I'm learning that the hard way as well, from the perspective of, trying to get, for example, health issues under control. You kind of think you could take a few pills or get, a few checkups done and go through some stuff and that you're on your way, but your body keeps telling you things as you go. And I think that's important to listen to it. But first and foremost, it's forced me to sit back and think about how I spend my time and what brings me joy. And if we can't wake up every morning with a sense of gratitude and be grateful for the life we have and what we're about to do for the day, or the people we're about to spend it with, or the things that we already have, if we spend all of our time wishing we had more, wishing we were richer, wishing we had more friends or closer relationships with our family, when we do all those things, it robs us of being happy in the moment. And so you have to sort of stop and think, okay, what brings me joy, and how do I want to spend my time, and how do I want to spend my days? And I recognized early on, when I started my own business, there were certain things that I really disliked, like commuting, going into an office, having to have long drawn out meetings with people of which there was no agenda and no tasks or follow-up action plan. And it was just meeting for the sake of meeting, and working with business leaders who needed to look you in the eye in order to tell you the simplest of tasks. So, I started my own business embarking on the idea of creating a more flexible work-life balance, of not having to commute, having a home office, being able to manage clients through a long distance. And it took a while to build up to that, because a lot of people even in the mid 2005, 2008, even in that time frame, working from home and having that kind of flexible online relationship was still new to people. And so it took a while to build up to that, where I could accomplish that idea of not having to commute or spend time doing things that I just really dislike doing. But even once those things got taken away, I realized there were still gaps. There were still holes in, do I enjoy the work I'm doing? Do I enjoy the people I'm working with? Am I taking time every day to be grateful that I have these people in my life? Or am I just miserable and, kind of pissed off that these are the clients I have and who I have to work with? And so it was a combination of these things that happened last year, where I started to realize, I shouldn't be getting up every morning angry or anxious because I have to have a meeting with somebody. It should be work I want to do, and I should enjoy doing it. And that's when I started to realize that you can start to affect some of the symptoms, or some of the, as if you were looking at it as a health issue, you could start to address some of the symptoms. But until you really drill into the core of what's really causing this, you tinker with the symptoms and you don't really get at the root cause. And so that's when I started to really think about how I spend my day. I started to work with a coach who really helped me from a mindfulness perspective of, blocking out one day of the week just to think, just to read, not to feel guilty that I don't have a million meetings, just to sit down and try to strategize and think through some of these issues, because we oftentimes as human beings don't even take time to think.
We don't, and that's been hardwired into our expectations, into our brains, into our psyches, that we need to grind and hustle and run. We need to be that Duracell bunny all the time, and then we don't take the time to listen. We don't, and that also, I think, in my experience, it comes in various stages. Like, you start becoming a little bit more mindful, and then something else happens and wakes you up, and then you become a little bit more mindful, and then, so it's stages. But listening is probably, listening and being still is the biggest, I can't even emphasize enough how big that is, to sit with yourself and just listen. But we often get caught up in that in the pace of life.
And what I would also say about that is that if we've created a habit of self-criticism during those moments of downtime. And one of the reasons I've recognized now, one of the reasons why I hated commuting into the city so much is that it was an hour and a half or an hour in the car by myself of just me alone with my thoughts.
You and yourself.
Which were oftentimes quite critical, and well, I'm not doing this and I'm not doing that. And I can't tell you the number of times I was, on the phone to people saying, okay, let's get this done and let's get that done. I think my team in particular dreaded the moments where I was commuting somewhere because they knew there'd be a phone call saying, we should be doing this and we should be doing this, because it was a million things going through my head. So the first thing was to create this space, to create this time for myself, to not feel guilty that I wasn't, quote unquote, productive, that I wasn't working 60 hours a week, and to not feel guilty, to create this space and create this time. And then what the coach also helped me work on was create a framework for how to analyze opportunity and decide which were the things that were really worthy of my time. And I don't say that to be egotistical. I say it, what's really worthy of my time, and what's the stuff that I've just been doing because I thought I had to do it, because I was concerned about what someone would say if I didn't do it. And that's also very much a flaw of perfectionism, is that you're not doing things for yourself. You're doing things because of what you think people might think about you. Right. Or what they might say about you.
There lacks intention, like true intention. What is your intention for, this call or this particular contract with people? Yeah, there lacks intention in perfectionism. Absolutely.
So I wanted to really understand that, and I wanted to work really hard to not do that anymore. And I wanted to not be the person who would just glad hand somebody in a networking event and say, oh yeah, it's great what you're doing. It's so great. To really understand what they're doing, and then to be very honest about whether that's slotted in somewhere. Where in the past, and this is one of my favorite lines of Brené Brown, is she says, it's important to have that 8-second uncomfortable conversation so that you alleviate 2 months of being resentful.
Uncomfortable.
And, the people would come up and talk to me about stuff after I'd spoken at an event or I'd been out somewhere, and then I would connect with them because out of a sense of obligation, not out of a sense of, is this the right thing for me? Is this the right thing for them? If it's not the right thing for me, I should be upfront about that and pass them somewhere where they might have a better chance of connecting with the right people. And so it was things like that that I realized about myself. And as I was realizing these things, I was starting to realize that they were behaviors I could change, and that there were things I could observe in myself, and there's ways that I could be different. So I'm a lot more intentional in my conversations with our clients now, which really helped me alleviate this idea of not enjoying the work or not enjoying the people, because it wasn't about the people and it wasn't about the work. I'm doing what I've always been trained to do, and I should love it because it's what I'm good at. But I realized it was not being clear, not being intentional. And there were going to be lots of times that I was going to have difficult conversations with people. But to understand how to handle those correctly and recognize that you might come off, you're not going to look perfect in some of these things because you're going to have to deliver information or deliver news that people don't necessarily want to hear. Or, create a way to open up that conversation so you could get to a better place in the conversation. And so I recognized that, and recognized that I wasn't good at it because it made me uncomfortable, and I wanted to be perfect all the time. So once I embraced that and really dug into that, that changed a lot of things that were happening for me from a business perspective. And it was creating that framework with the coach that really helped me identify how to do a better job of those kinds of conversations, how to prepare for them better, and how to be a lot more direct about what the outcome needed to be, not dance around it because I was afraid somebody was going to be critical of me. So those were really important things that I've been working on. And I would, I'd love to say it's 100% better and things are going great. I recognize this is going to be a journey and it's going to take a while.
And isn't that hard as well to admit for perfectionists or recovering perfectionists? That famous, it's a journey, and it's true. right?
Yeah, and I hate that expression because I
Right?
don't want to be a journey.
I
I
know.
just want to get to the damn destination and take my
I
shoes off and
am,
relax.
I'm
But
with you. I'm with
yeah,
you. But
yeah.
it's something that I also remind myself, I remind my clients all the time. We want, as recovering perfectionists, we just want to get to the freaking destination.
Well, this is where, and I'll be dead honest. This is where it kind of started to knock itself out of me, is that when you spend your life constantly wanting to get to the destination, and even when you get there, then you're thinking about the next destination.
Exactly.
I started my career as an event planner, and there's no better career path for perfectionists than event planning, because it's always about the next task and the next set of events. And now you've got it done. Let's move on to the next thing. But where it hit me pretty hard is, if there was a person in your life, this is the way I think people need to think about it. If there was a person in your life who you loved deeply and you just couldn't live without, if the thought of them getting sick and having to deal with that illness, and the conclusion of that illness might be death, you start to think about wanting to get to the next step in completely different terms, because you don't want to get to the next step. You don't want to get to the destination. You need to sit and work through the journey, because the outcome of that journey might not be good, and you don't necessarily want to get there. And so for me, when it was put in those terms to me, it really knocked out of me that sense of, I need to accept that this is a journey, because if I'm rushing to get to the next destination, things are going to get taken away from me, and I'm not going to like it very much. So that's not the way I should view life. And that was the big changing point for me.
That's a huge one. What a great way to put it. I mean, if that doesn't work, I don't know what will.
No, right? I don't think there's much else in life that can do it for you other than that.
Unless it's for someone who doesn't have meaningful people that they absolutely adore in their life. That's rare, because we're all wired for connection. But so how has it changed today, the way that you work with people? And I mean, I hear that you are a lot more direct. You do not shy away from uncomfortable conversations, even if it's worth 8 seconds. But I want to know more about the profile of the people that you probably now choose to work with. And as you're focusing a lot on women in tech, what can you say about that? And how does your company feature, in the best light possible, the work of these women through marketing and your own decisions as well to work differently?
Well, let's go back for a second. I'm going to answer that in two different ways. I think the work that we do, I made a list for myself. I personally hate New Year's resolutions. And I saw somebody post this great thing that said, don't make New Year's resolutions. Just make a list of things with 2 columns, one that's do more and one that's do less. And I did this for myself personally. And then I also did it for me as a business leader and what I wanted to do in the business, the do more, the do less list. And one of the things that I do a lot less of is talking, believe it or not, even though we've talked a lot on this podcast.
That's the purpose of the podcast, though. Sorry.
Yeah, okay, all right. So when I get into meetings now with clients in particular, I do a lot less talking. I do a lot more asking questions, and I do a lot more listening, because I find in those moments when you're listening, you can get to people's true intentions when you talk less and listen more. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That was hard for me. I'm wired to be a talker, and I have been since a young age. And I spent a lot of time working very hard on listening, and that really opened up a lot of space in the conversations to allow me to think through to the next step in the conversation a lot better than I had in the past, when I was just hurrying up to have them finish so I could start talking again. And I decided that, that wasn't the way to be. So that helped me a lot. How that helped me in the work that I'm doing right now is I struggled a little bit about 2 years ago when I embarked upon this work that I wanted to do around profiling women in tech and doing everything I could to get more women into tech, because I firmly believe that the future of our community and of society is reliant on a more diverse tech sector. We're about to embrace and embark on brand new technologies that are going to change the way we live, change the way we work. And if we don't have everyone at the table to help affect that type of technology, and we've seen it already in technology tools that don't have good ethics or standards behind them, what happens when people can run amok with unethical technology? If we don't have everybody at the table, it's going to hurt us as a society, and it's going to hurt our communities, and it's going to hurt who we are if it's not a diverse workforce representing the tech sector. That's the first thing. The second thing is a sheer economics thing. And I used to do a lot of work with the Canadian Women's Foundation in Canada, helping in both economic and violence prevention. And the economics are such that we're going to have such a huge need for talent in 2020 and 2021. There's going to be so many jobs that women aren't doing themselves a service by not looking to the tech sector, because they're going to be able to make money there and be a valuable part of the workforce. And I might add, on their terms. I think there's a lot of companies waking up to the fact that they need to be on their terms, not on the company's terms, around flexible workspace, supportive work environments, flexible work terms. And so there's been no more important time than for tech. And we're kind of going through what we went through in the 80s when we didn't have enough women doctors and enough women in the medical profession. And we saw how it affected healthcare. Well, if we don't step up and do the exact same thing in tech, it's going to affect us as well. And so I started this work about 2 years ago. I sat on panels. I went across the country talking to people about this. And then I started the podcast as a way to listen to women's stories and hear about how they got into tech, what tech had done for them, to share the profile of those stories so that we could talk to tech companies as well as young women about what they need to do more of. And so that ability to talk less and listen more has served me well across the board, because some of the stories I've heard coming back have been incredible and have pointed me in the right direction about, then here's the next step. Here's what we do next. And even though I was very uncertain probably 18 months ago about what I was going to do with this and where I was going to take it, the ability to listen guided me in the right direction. And so I would say that that has probably been one of the most powerful things I've been able to do.
So can you share with us a little bit of your observations that I don't know if they're conclusions, but the observations that you've been able to draw from those experiences with these women as they share their stories?
Yeah, there's been two really interesting observations. First and foremost, women are incredible at coming together and solving problems. We see this in third world countries as people are you give a woman in a third world country a cell phone and it's incredible the cottage industry she'll start and the way she'll start to use it and make money. So women have always been good at coming together. Mm-hmm. The problem is that the tech companies have to step up and see this as a opportunity and something they need to get involved with as well. So what the work has led to is being able to prepare workshops to take to tech companies to say, here's how you need to think about 4 really important areas in your organization: recruitment practices, mentoring and sponsorship, flexible workplaces, and pay equity. And every single person I've interviewed has had a story on one of those topics, and those 4 topics emerged. And so as we put those topics together, we decided that we could build a workshop around them to help tech companies understand what they need to do differently. And we are going to the tech companies and talking about it from an economics perspective, that if they're going to be short tech talent, why are they ignoring 51% of the population? They themselves should be stepping up and trying to advance women in tech. So these areas are what bubbled to the top, and we're able now to be much more specific and purposeful in figuring out how to get tech companies on side to help fix the problem as well. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, women want to come and talk together and talk about this. They want to promote, they want to go tell young girls to get into tech. So we're still trying to find ways to elevate those stories and really share in the communities that we can influence, so that more women will see this as a good place for them to be. And those are the way we're coming at it from two sides.
What do women in tech need to absolutely know in terms of how you suggest, with the wisdom and expertise you have today from your personal life and the business, your business expertise in marketing, as a woman in tech, what would you say to these women that they absolutely need to know today in order to be successful and also run a life that fulfills them?
Well, I think whether we like it or not, tech affects so much of our lives today, right? Like, there's just, technology is pervasive, it's everywhere. If it wasn't for the internet and the tools that I have available to me, I would never have been able to run my own business out of, a place just north of Toronto, Canada, and be serving people all over North America. So tech has changed the way we work. So I think the trick is to understand what you're really good at. Now, I don't necessarily even mean do what you love or any of that. I just figure out what you're really good at. And whatever that is, there is definitely a place for you somewhere in a tech company or in the tech industry, because tech needs a whole bunch of things. It doesn't just need coders. It needs people who understand good project management. It definitely needs people who understand communications. It definitely needs people who understand how to apply things to different new markets. And every single woman I've interviewed on the podcast has told the story of how she slid into tech. She didn't mean to go there. She didn't graduate from high school thinking, I'm going to have a career in the tech industry. She slid in because she was really good at something. So the advice I would give people is, you're really good at something, and there's probably a way to apply what you're really good at in the tech sector, and there's going to be tons of opportunity for you there. So you really shouldn't dismiss it. You really should think about how your contribution right now, because it's probably going to lead to your ability to start your own business, create something on your own terms, be part of something bigger than yourself. That's been my experience, and more than any other sector I've worked in. And I do work in lots of different sectors for the tech companies that I work for. That's been my experience. And I think, there's so much flexibility, and there's so much opportunity, and there's so much room to do things differently within the sector.
Thank you. That's very clear. Also, wanted to ask you, what are the best decisions you've made to turn your life around from this moment of realization that something needs to change because it's, challenges are hitting you in the face, to today? What are the best decisions you've made?
Well, we've talked about one of them. One of the best decisions I made was putting my spouse at the top of the list, not at the bottom of the list.
That's a good one, Marie. Thank you.
That's caused a lot more happiness in my life.
Yeah.
The second decision that I've made is to include my kids in the business. My eldest daughter works in our business full time, and having it be a family business has its challenges. It sure does. Like, there's always complexity around things that you're never expecting, but I've found it to be way more positive than any of the negatives I've had to deal with. So I've been really grateful about my decision to include my kids in the business any way I can. And then I guess the third decision that I made is, and this is a very recent one, and it definitely is a journey, and I'm not saying I have answers yet, and I haven't worked it out, but to finally at this stage in my life figure out how to put myself first, and to look after my own health, and to look after my own needs. That's been a tough one for me because I've never put myself first, and to not think that, I remember a physiotherapist used to say to me when I had a bad back, and I remember the physiotherapist saying, you're going to start to feel better, either because of the drugs you're taking or the exercises you're doing. You're going to start to feel better. So you're going to try to do more. And as you start to do more, you have to be very careful because you could re-injure yourself. You're going to hurt yourself again. And so what I've discovered about different health challenges is exactly that, is that you start to think you're feeling better, and then you start to get up and you realize you're not ready to get up yet. And it's that idea that don't beat yourself up for it. Be kind to yourself and say, you're just not ready to get up yet. You're just not ready to get off the mats yet. You still need to stay down because you still have some healing to do. And I would say that that's been one of the most important things I've had to learn. And that's probably one of the things that that's going to be a lifelong lesson for me.
I love that. I think for the recovering perfectionist, that is a shared lesson. I've experienced the same type of challenges. And also as a woman who actually realizes that I love to work with other women, I love to collaborate with people, I love to, and it's one of our qualities, right? As you were mentioning, these women who, are so creative in the way that they can generate wealth with just a phone, because we like to talk, and we like to be accompanied and to accompany others in the process of a project or work. Would you say that, and this is not to beat the horn of coaches, but this is something that I realized when I first discovered that I needed more in my life. I discovered that I needed to be with people who would feed me information and nurture me in ways that I had never realized before. It was like an opening to receive, support. And that was a big discovery for me, because I had been that type that just does not, I have to do it all on my own always. I don't ask my husband's help. I don't ask my kids' help, which actually gave them really bad habits of not, doing chores in the house, because I would do it all. I basically just wanted to do it all. It was a form of protection, but opening myself up to actually having people who actually I allow them to support me was a huge deal for me.
Yep. Yeah. Exactly. Yep. I would say absolutely. That's a huge hurdle to get over. And
it is, right? It's like resistance to having, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And well, I think that we are pretty much, we're almost done already. It's been 50 minutes. What would be, my last question to you would be, what would be, and this is one of my favorite questions actually, the one thing that you cannot go without during your day, every day, the one thing you cannot go without?
Talking to my husband.
Oh, that's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much for such transparent, honest, sincere, just radical conversation today. It is just amazing to be able to talk with people in this way. I'm very grateful for your honesty and your sharing. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And thank you for the work you do. It's important to have people like you out there. So thank you.
My pleasure. Have a beautiful end of your day in Toronto.
Thank you
north
so
of Toronto.
Much. Yes, north of Toronto. It's still cold up here, but I will.
Oh my God. Yes. No, I don't want to go there anymore. Or live there. Go there, yes, to visit, but live there.
It's getting better.
I know. Take care, Marie. Thank you so much. Have a beautiful week, everyone. See you next week. Thank you.